All right, so we've looked at how things are playing out for the South at home during the war. Now let's look at the Union. So home in the North is not nearly as bad as it is in the South. It's not great, but it's not quite as, economically dire and as crazy as it is in the South at this point. So just like in the South, they are going to draft in the North. So conscription, which is that technical word for draft, conscription in the North in the Union will begin in March of 1863. So almost a year after the draft begins in the South. There it starts in April of 62. So in March of 63, conscription begins in the North. Men who can't or who don't want to serve in the draft could also get out of the draft in the Union by taking advantage of one of two opportunities. The first way they could get out of the draft would be to hire a substitute to replace them, and then the second way you could get out would just be by paying a $300 fee. So basically, the only way of getting out of the war in the Union is by being wealthy. And $300, you're like, oh, whatever. I'm sure everybody can do that. No, $300 in 1863 is like more than 7 months' pay for an average worker, and 7 months' pay for an average worker in 2016 is closer to between $20,000 and $30,000. So, having to pay $20,000 to $30,000 to not have to go to the draft, I don't know anyone who can pay that out of pocket, except for very, very wealthy people. So once again, it's pretty much, like I said, just the wealthy who can get out of it. And just like in the South, people in the North hate the draft. Anti-draft riots are going to break out all across the North. New York City is going to see the largest anti-draft riot in July of 1863. It lasts for 4 days. People are attacking the draft offices. They're also attacking African Americans. You might ask why. They're attacking African Americans because they blame them for the war, right? They see African Americans and the black population in the North as being responsible for the war. The war is now being fought to help them to end slavery and all this. So that's who they blame for being forced to risk their lives and die, or and be forced to fight in the war. They are even attacking well-dressed men. They call them $300 men because they are, wealthy enough to get out of the war. So it's insulting to the rest of them. So by the end of this riot, over 100 people are going to be killed. So like I said, a huge, major, violent riot. The anti-war movement is continuing to grow. It's everyone's hating the draft. They're, questioning Lincoln's authority because they're losing, and the morale in the North at this point is just really at an all-time low. It's just impossible at this point to find a fair amount of people who are supportive of the war. So this is a good opportunity for the Democrats in the North to take back some support. We saw the Democrats losing and maybe, seeing the possibility of them fizzling out. At the beginning of the war, we know they're obviously not going to fizzle out because Democrats are still around today, but it seemed that was a possibility in the late 1850s and early 1860s. But here is a chance for the Democrats to get back some votes by branding themselves as anti-war. They called themselves peace Democrats. Their opponents called them copperheads. Copperheads because they said, they compared them to a poisonous snake, saying they're poisonous to the morale in the North and things like that. So the copperheads are actually urging soldiers to, desert or dodge a draft and things like that. So Lincoln is having a lot of problems holding on to support at all. So he decides in September of 1862 to suspend the constitutional right of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is your constitutional right of an arrested person to appear in court and be formally charged with a crime. This means that now you can be charged, or you can be arrested without ever having to be charged with a crime in front of a judge and never really getting due process. You're never able to defend yourself. So the federal government is going to start arresting people who are too outspoken about their opposition to the war, the draft, or emancipation. And Abraham Lincoln knew this violated the First Amendment, and he didn't care. He said he was willing to violate the Constitution in order to save the nation. And that's pretty much what he thought he was doing here. Tens of thousands of people are going to be arrested for violating, or not for violating, but for being basically too outspoken against Lincoln and his ideas. So let's look at what women are doing in the war. We've already sort of zoomed in on African Americans. Let's look at women. Hundreds of thousands of women, you know, all over the North and all over the South are going to be involved in the war. Hundreds of women are going to disguise themselves as men and enlist in the Union Army and in the Confederate Army. A lot of women are going to serve as spies for one side or the other, but most women are going to, you know, sort of keep things going at home, take over farms, plantations, other businesses, while fathers, sons, and husbands are away at war. They're going to work as bankers, steamboat captains. Women in the Union are going to start farming to make up for the lack of crops and product that's being produced from the South. They're going to produce huge amounts of food thanks to the McCormick Reaper, which is a new invention, making it easier to harvest food. In the North and in the South, they're going to be working in factories, making ammunition. And this is also the first time that women are going to be allowed to hold federal jobs. Over 100,000 jobs are going to be created in the North alone for women. So that's working women. We've also got, you know, wealthier women getting involved in the war effort. They are making bandages and sewing shirts and sheets. And even after the war, hundreds of women will move to the South to help teach and educate freedmen, former slaves. We're also going to see women working as paid nurses. That's what these pictures are both of on the slide. This is the bottom picture is nurse in a Union hospital, and the top picture are Confederate nurses. So nurses will be paid to work in both in Civil War hospitals, on hospital ships, and as well as battlefield hospitals. So right in the thick of combat, there's going to be women working as nurses. One of the most famous is a woman named Clara Barton. And Clara Barton is actually, during the Civil War, going to found the Red Cross, which is obviously an organization that is still around today. So the Red Cross was founded to care for the wounded on the battlefield. So we know that one of the most important pieces of this entire war is going to be the Anaconda Plan. And eventually, what I told you already, it's going to work. It's going to strangle the South. And that all revolves around the sea, right? It revolves around the Mississippi River, and it revolves around the Atlantic Ocean. So the Navy for both the Union and the Confederacy are both going to be very important. So first let's talk about that Union blockade. At the start of the war, getting past the blockade was not difficult at all. There were not many ships out there. It wasn't hard for a Union or for a Confederate ship to be able to break past the blockade and make it to Europe and trade with them. By the summer of 1862, however, it has gotten very, very tight, and most southern ports are going to be guarded by a Union warship. So how can the Confederacy get around this blockade? They have to build ships specifically designed to do that. So they're going to build some new ships that we call Blockade Runners, and they're going to run the blockade, which basically means run along the blockade line until you find a weak spot and try to break through it. So these are ships specifically built for speed. These are some of the fastest ships we have on the water at this point. They're low to the water and sleek and painted gray to be basically invisible, and they run at night, so they're really difficult to see. On top of that, they burn a special type of coal called anthracite coal, which really produces a colorless smoke, so it makes it even more difficult to see. So blockade runners would pack full of cotton, and they would return with goods to sell in the South, so silk, soap, and pepper, along with things that were really expensive in the South. Now, why are they bringing that back instead of food and, you know, weapons and manufactured goods and medical supplies and things like that? They're bringing back worthless, expensive things because the captains and the people on these ships can make a commission off of what they sell. So obviously they're going to want to get things that are going to make them the most amount of money, and some captains could even make up to $5,000 in gold from just one trip. But as the war goes on, eventually they're going to start bringing back military supplies, food, and medicine. They're doing all this risking facing pretty long prison terms. So the risk is high, but the reward is high as well if they are able to be successful. Now, another type of ship that we've talked about already is ironclads. If you remember ironclads, those ships were the warships that had that 3-inch thick iron lining all around the outside, making it almost impossible, to destroy it with cannon fire or gunfire. So one of the most impressive ironclads was the USS Merrimack, and once the South secedes, the South takes the Merrimack and soups it up and makes it even better and reclaim it, and they name it the CSS Virginia. And this thing is bad. It's really the best ship, most impressive thing on the ocean. So the Union hears about it, they want their own, and they've got to soup it up and make it as fantastic as the Virginia. So they create the USS Monitor. And when the Monitor is ready, it was specifically built to match the Virginia. So why not go find it and pick a fight? So on March 9th of 1862, the USS Monitor sets out, finds the CSS Virginia off the coast of Virginia, and engages it in battle. This is the first ever ironclad battle. They fought for hours. This was called the Battle of Hampton Roads. But there's no winner, and the USS or CSS Virginia is finally forced to port in Virginia due to engine problems. Like I said, no winner in this battle. In May of 1863, they're actually going to try to prevent, the Confederacy is worried that the Union's going to capture the CSS Virginia and use it against them. So they end up deciding to just destroy it so it can't be used against them. So in May, they're going to destroy their own ship. The last type of ship I want you to know, they're called Confederate raiders. Raider ships were specifically designed to hurt the Union economy as bad, or at least to try to hurt it as badly as the Union has been hurting the Confederate economy with the blockade in the Atlantic and the Anaconda Plan. So there are about 30 raider ships out there. What raiders are designed to do is roam the world and attack Union merchant ships to disrupt their trade. So the most successful of these raider ships is going to be the Css Alabama. The Css Alabama actually sinks and captures 68 merchant ships before it's finally sunk off the coast of France in 1864. But it wasn't the only one. That was just one ship. We've also got others, like the Css Shenandoah, which is going to capture and destroy over 38 merchant ships, which is pretty impressive.